Good morning, and welcome to Southminster Presbyterian Church in Beaverton, Oregon. My name is Ludwig. I'm the interim pastor here. And on this Pentecost Sunday, I do hope that you and your family are doing well and your spirits are up. Many years ago, when I was a substitute teacher in Sandpoint, Idaho, I was called in to teach physical education classes to sophomores and juniors one day. The teacher gave me strict instructions that the class was to be in the weight room working on the weightlifting and not in the gymnastics room. So that's what I told them. But about halfway through the class, several of the students found their way over to the gymnastics area. And so I proceeded to tell them that they shouldn't be in there. And then it came to me. I decided to offer them a challenge. If anyone in the class could beat me in a wrestling match, then they could do whatever they wanted for the rest of the class. I had wrestled before, even knew some secret moves, and appeared to be stronger than anyone else in the class. Well, the class chose a particular student who was scrawny looking, to be honest. I was about 15 pounds heavier than him. I was sure to win. I immediately took off my tie and got into the wrestling stance. By now, everyone in the class was there to watch, including many students from other places in the school. I'm not sure how they learned about this, but they did. And we were there in the wrestling stance, circling each other, and then all of a sudden it happened. All of a sudden, I was slammed to the mat and in a half Nelson by the student, from which I could not move. All of the spectators began to count 1, 2, 3, and I was pinned. I was humiliated until that is, I was told with whom I'd been wrestling with. His name was Zachariah Taylor, a sophomore and the Idaho State wrestling champ for over 2 years. He had taken third in the national competitions and was now preparing for the '96 Olympics. Go figure. Another story that happens in our Old Testament. A story about a nervous Jacob who is about to meet his estranged brother Esau. He had been gone from his hometown for 14 years, and he was worried that his brother had not forgiven him yet for stealing his birthright from him. So when Jacob gets to the river where his brother is to be on the other side, he starts scheming. First, he sends presents over to his brother. Then he sends his wives and children. And there he sat alone, waiting, anguished by the silence. We share Jacob's lonely retreat all too often. For many of us today, this pandemic is a never-ending nightmare. We struggle with the unknown, with so many uncertainties, with incompetent leaders, with unsolvable problems, and we feel alone. But here is the crazy thing. Jacob is not alone. Something is there moving in the shadows. Someone comes up to him, grabs hold of him, and wrestles him to the ground. "Who are you?" cries out Jacob. But no response. "Who are you?" we cry out with Jacob. But we know in our heart of hearts, we know who it is. It is the Spirit of God who refuses to let go of us. The Spirit of God that even though we are running away, God comes racing after us and wrestles with us throughout the night. Jacob, in this place, discovers that his problem with his brother was not meaningless, that God was not here to take his life away from him or punish him. God was here to transform him into something new, something more possible than he ever dreamed of. Jacob learns that it is the struggle itself, not winning or losing, not scheming. It is the struggle itself that gives Jacob a sense of purpose, a sense of joy, even in the midst of difficulty. Sometimes we view transformation as an event instead of as a process of perseverance. We want to win the struggle and be done with it. And yet much of what we know in our world, what we know to be true about life, is grounded in seeing the big picture, seeing the long game. So much of life, as you know, requires us to have a tenacity, a determination, a stick-to-itiveness that is only realized in the long struggle that seemingly has no end. Like this pandemic and the heartfelt concern that we all have for those who are most impacted and feeling helpless that we can do anything about it. Like caring for a loved one or a parent or a spouse who is aging or going through some difficulty, or caring for a child with learning disabilities. Like working for peace and justice when we know it is one step forward and two steps back. Or like seeing the simplest act of caring of wearing a mask in these days being used to divide us into red and blue teams. Or like yet another story of a black man, this time by the name of George Floyd, being murdered in broad daylight and having police officers falsely claim that he had threatened them. Yet another time, will this ever end? For Jacob and for all of us, the light at the end of the tunnel can seem so dim. Transformation often requires us doing something despite how difficult it is. I am reminded of Sisyphus, the character from Greek mythology who is condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain, only to watch the rock roll back down again and to repeat that climb over and over and over again, forever. No finishing the task, no result, just an eternity of meaningless effort and suffering. Albert Camus, the famous existential philosopher, painted a different picture of Sisyphus. It is worth considering. Camus argues that though it may confound our linear hope for progress and fly in the face of our urge to make a difference, we must see Sisyphus as being happy, as being fulfilled. Now, hear him out. Perhaps the climb up that mountain becomes more comfortable over time. Perhaps the muscles that once strained under the weight of the rock now easily control it. It could happen. And perhaps Sisyphus began to move the rock gracefully so that the act of pushing it became an art, not suffering. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a person's heart, writes Camus, that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. The struggle itself can be a source of joy. That's not something I like to hear. It is challenging. We want things to get through as quickly as possible. When I was visiting a member of the church this past week on FaceTime, I was asked, "How do you do it, Don? How do you remain positive with all that is going on around us?" Well, the truth be told, there are also times when I think about walking away from the boulder. There are times when I want to give up. I want myself to just be pinned on that mat. Just 2 days ago, I received a heartbreaking email from a Black student in my social justice class at Clark. It reads, "With everything going on, Mr. Ludwig, the country, I don't have the strength anymore to write my final paper about racism, as I'm currently living in that right now. Last night, while I was walking my dog, I was called the N-word by a car driving by. Just another reminder of a racist country with a racist president. I am really struggling right now with the death of Mr. Floyd. Any inspiration is welcome." So many of us feel depleted these days and crave any kind of inspiration. As I told my student, I have never experienced racism personally, but my heart breaks for him and for all African Americans everywhere. I told him that what helps me is a reminder that nothing worth a salt ever comes easy. It is not easy being steadfast, not easy in our personal lives, not easy in our efforts for equity and fairness, not easy when our needs are endless and when progress is slow and when setbacks are far too many. It helps me to be centered not only on success, but rather, as Wendell Berry wrote, on preserving qualities in one's own heart that would be destroyed by acquiescence. It helps me to be inspired by a vision of a beloved community and a strong sense that, like Jacob, I am not alone. I find myself reading a lot more Black literature lately. Something I did not know about Maya Angelou was that she had planned a big party for her 40th birthday on April 4th, 1968. Does that date ring any bells for you? It was the day that Dr. King was assassinated. She went into a deep depression which lasted weeks. She wrote, "The times were so solemn and the daily news was so somber." It would have been easy for her to give up. But then she focused on the people around her, the community she belonged to, and the history of how African Americans have experienced transformation in the past. She later wrote, "We survived slavery. Do you know how we survived? We put surviving into our poems and into our songs. We put it into our folk tales. We danced surviving and put it into our pots of cooked pinto beans. We knew if we ever wanted to survive, we must lift our own spirits. So we laughed whenever we got the chance." "Nothing good in life ever comes easy," said Theodore Roosevelt. Actually, his full quote is much more substantial. He said, "Nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort and pain and difficulty." He goes on to say, "I have never in my life envied a human being who led an easy life. I've envied a great many people who led difficult lives and led them well." I can imagine Jacob that night being afraid, but ever so content that he was in the right place. I see Jacob walking down to the river the next morning. He's limping, and he will never forget the night he had. He will always be reminded of the struggles that tore him apart and the wrestling that put him back together again. When we are struggling, we come away, as Jacob did, closer and deeper and with greater strength for the journey that we ever had before. I also see Sisyphus looking down on us, smiling. Yes, smiling at us, knowing that the boulders of our lives serve only to deepen our experience and ground us into the fortitude that is already within us. In fact, isn't that what Pentecost is all about? In the midst of our struggles, we are accompanied by the Spirit that comes alongside us, giving us hope to continue and confidence to meet any challenge before us. Years ago, it was a young, scrawny 14-year-old kid from Sandpoint, Idaho, who pinned me down to a mat in 8 seconds, embarrassing me into the realization that my own strength was not sufficient. 8 seconds was like a lifetime. And so it has been. Throughout my life, I've experienced struggles with myself, with my own limitations, with my own imperfections. Currently, I struggle with the helplessness in the midst of so much need. I struggle with our self-serving leaders that only care about their own egos. I struggle with a world that is becoming desensitized to death and racial bigotry. I struggle. The boulders in life seem to be getting bigger and bigger. The mountains seem to be getting steeper and steeper. But then I remember that transformation never happens quickly. I look to history and I'm reminded that nothing good comes easy. And I once again recommit myself to this thing called life, to the long haul. And like Jacob, I realize that the Spirit of God is with me, and that joy is always ultimately discovered in the struggle itself. And I keep moving forward. Amen.